So we're gonna do this. Cool. Hi. We're gonna introduce ourselves later, but anyway, I'm Danielle. This is Dan. This is Franklin. We are here from Stripe to tell you about running game days, by which I mean breaking shit in our live production servers, just to see what happens. Stripe, if anyone has not heard of it, is the easiest way to take payments on the internet, which all my friends assure me is actually true. Basically, we have an API, we set it up, and you don't actually have to think about how money works, so we do that for you. And we are here to talk about game days, which I think Dan will explain.
Sure thing. So game days, in the kind of driest form, is injecting failures into a running application to see where your expectations diverge from reality about what happens when shit hits the fan. Or as she said, just breaking shit for fun and seeing what happens. Not quite for fun though. But anyway, this is the idea. Basically, you are going and doing this, and you are going to set out what your expectations are about your application's characteristics in a failure scenario, create that failure scenario, and see where they diverge, and fix it for the next time.
And because it takes a team to run one, we decided to come here as a team to sort of tell you about it.
And what will we be doing?
So during a game day, each person has a specific role, and we'll be taking on those roles for the purpose of this talk. I'm Franklin. I will be taking on the role of the Destroyer. And it's my job to actually break things and remind everybody of what horrible things can possibly go wrong.
And I'm Dan. I work on our real-time data team at Stripe, and I will be playing the role of the fixer. And it's my job to fix problems as they arise, whether expected or unexpected.
All right, like I said, I'm Danielle. I'm also an engineer on our real-time data team. I will be taking on the role of the planner, who actually sets us up as experiments, where we have hypotheses that we set out to hopefully not disprove. Mostly this is an excuse to buy lab coat, which I've wanted to buy for years, and now I have one, so I'm the happiest person in this room. Let's see, also before we get started, today is totally Captain Picard Day, so happy Captain Picard Day. There are any other Star Trek nerds in the room? Thank you, I'm not alone here, I appreciate that. So, why do we run game days?
Yeah, so this does, probably present some questions. What we described is something which sounds like it should be solvable via testing. And, we've got some slightly different goals here. We're kind of exercising these specific failures. But yeah, I mean, it is a legitimate question. Why would we do this? This is pretty dangerous. We're kind of playing with fire here.
Right, like things might blow up. But the goal behind the game day is to test those failure scenarios in our live systems and make sure that they behave the way we want them to. And if they're going to blow up, we want to see that happen and find out now. We're creating a controlled environment where we can just, change things in a controlled way, one thing at a time, and see how everything reacts and, see what goes wrong.
Plus, I mean, you never really know what's going to happen until you test it yourself. And we'd rather know the consequences of these actions and be ready with potential remediations rather than getting paged and then flowing around and freaking out about it.
They're also useful for sussing out places where your metrics or monitoring might be lacking. It might be the case that if your application does fail, your customers will see it, but maybe you won't have the right chart set up to actually observe a change in behavior. Or else maybe your charts will move, but only when you're watching them and you won't get an alert. These are the sorts of things that you'll figure out by actually injecting those failures and observing the outcomes.
Yeah, I know we're all here to talk about monitoring, but sometimes we haven't figured that out perfectly. Better to find out. So, can't we do this like in QA or staging instead? Do we really have to break production?
So for most people, production is going to be the best approximation of production. We're going to be testing things that are going to happen. I mean, instances will fail, networks will eat your packets, and we want to be sure that we're ready for it.
Yeah, and I mean, QA environments often have an asterisk supply. Maybe they don't have as much traffic as production. In fact, presumably they don't have as much traffic as production, hopefully. They have different types of workloads. They may not have the same amount of monitoring, or even any, so it's just not as realistic of an exercise.
So my job might sound a lot like a manual chaos monkey, and you might be wondering how those differ.
Right, so Chaos Monkey says, ooh, that got really loud. Random failures into your systems, which is pretty awesome, and you should totally try it out. But we have a different goal with game days. We don't want to send out random failures and see what happens. We want to test these really, carefully designed experiments where we have, expectations set up in advance that we can compare to our observed results. More like a controlled experiment, less chaos.
Okay, and it sounds like, even if we're okay with breaking all these things, there might be people in other parts of the company that might not be so keen.
And that's right, and there's really no denying it. This sort of exercise does introduce a substantial upfront cost. At the very least, you'll be burning, 5 engineers' time or so for an afternoon. More than likely, there will be kind of further cascading failures that will either take up time or other costs.
Right, but the idea is that game days are a way to increase the reliability of your system. Yeah, you might, create some horrible problem in production and everything breaks and that's expensive, but, if that happens, it was going to happen later anyway. It's a cost you were going to have to bear, but this way you get to control when you have to pay that cost and how to best mitigate it. So, you're making an investment in long-term stability. So, okay, now that you've convinced your boss that it's worth letting you break production, let's walk through the game day process. We're going to talk about how you plan a game day, how to run it, and the remediation and communication that comes afterwards.
Of course, this would get rather dry without some real examples.
So we'll mix in a couple of stories of when we kill 9 our Redis primary and kind of make some people upset.
Oh, it's me? Oh, oops. Okay, yeah, okay, time to walk through a game day. What kind of scenarios can we test?
So we can do all sorts of things. There are going to be a whole bunch of slides here that you can look at later on. We can do single node failures. We can do sort of like correlated system tests. We can do network partitions. Things that users might do accidentally or maliciously. Database stuff. How crazy do we want to get?
Yeah, okay, so everyone here knows the KISS principle, right? Keep it simple, stupid. Folks can look at like a long list of things to try later, but for right now, what kinds of problems can we cause and test easily?
So specifically, we're going to scope the kinds of failures, the kinds of failures that we'll test for to things that we actually have a backup or kind of disaster recovery plan for, such as my Halo. The idea is to test those backup plans, those disaster recovery plans, those failover mechanisms, rather than make up new ones on the fly.
Right, otherwise this might actually be as crazy as it sounds.
Okay, so I think that the easiest things that we want to test are going to be killing some processes, terminating some instances, maybe playing around with some network partitions. We definitely also want to make sure that our database failover strategy works. We just want to make sure that our data is safe. And it can also be fun to simulate some things that people might do accidentally, right? Like killing the wrong process or removing your root directory.
So to that point, we'll probably want to pick the order that we run these tests in kind of increasing amounts of kind of danger and difficulty of recovery. So start out with the things that should be the most harmless and the easiest to recover from, and progressively challenge ourselves over the course of the day.
You mean you don't want to get stuck in some horrible failure and just spend the entire afternoon debugging that?
Yeah, no. What we want to do is we want to make our tests progressively worse and worse, and walk further out and out along our branch until finally everything is so horrible that it cracks and we fall down. And in fact, if we come up with any test ideas that we wouldn't even know how to recover from yet, let's just file issues for dealing with those now and save testing them for next time instead. We also want to make sure that we can see the right changes in metrics and we get paged if we want to get paged, and not if we don't want to get paged. So we're going to write down those expectations beforehand so we can compare them with what actually happens.
Speaking of which, at the point that we're running the exercise, we probably want to alert other teams to the fact that this is happening. Certainly let the on-call people know, stuff like that. We wouldn't want somebody to get surprised by these kind of failures that we're introducing.
Right, so we're going to put together a spreadsheet that basically has, what we're testing, the exact commands we're going to run, the expected outcome, how to recover if something goes horrendously horrible. Boy, that was repetitive. So we have all that in one place. It's really easy, and this we know how far we get, and if we run out of time, we know where to pick up from later on. In real life, we probably should do 4 or 5 tests each time we run a game day. They usually take longer than you expect, but we don't have that much time today, so we're only going to talk about 3 of the things we've tried.
So again, as we were saying, we're going to walk through an example of a system that the 3 of us have run a game day on together. So the system in question is called Scoring Serve. So as you might remember from what Danielle was saying, Stripe is a system to accept credit card payments online. You can kind of think of it as an API for credit card payments. You, the users, supply us with some credit card information, we interact with the banks, and eventually make a payment out to your account. Now, unfortunately, a lot of our users are malicious and will be sending us fraudulent payments. And so we have a system in place called Scoring Serve to produce a score for those and try to determine whether we should let it through or not. If it's a fraudulent payment, it's really in nobody's best interest for us to let it go through except for the fraudsters. So scoring serve acts as a REST API alongside our main API, as you can see there. Every time a charge comes in, we make a request to it with the parameters of the charge, and it'll give back a judgment. It'll also consult Redis because it needs to keep some stateful information. So architecturally speaking, we have this API service that's on its own, that's involved in every charge that we process, and it's backed by Redis. So yeah, what could go wrong, right?
Okay, so I think for our first test, let's just terminate one of the scoring serve instances. We're running in AWS, so this is relatively easy to do. And as the number of hosts that you have grows, this happens with some regularity.
All right, so like, in theory, our stack should be robust to this kind of failure, since it does happen. Our hypotheses are really simple. We think latency should be totally okay. We think that we should get an email, but we don't actually want anyone or expect anyone to get paged. So we should have to wake up. So.
All right, so while we're running this exercise, Franklin's going to, of course, do the duty of destroying things. And you can imagine me here looking at our main latency charts for the API, as well as the latency charts for the scoring serve API. I've also put myself on call for the moment so that nobody else gets paged, and I'll be watching my phone. So Franklin, go ahead and terminate the instance. So now here's me watching my charts, watching my phone, and oh, look at that. I got an alert that the box went down. But as I'm looking at the charts, the latency looks great. So we got some good and some bad. The application behaved as we expected, but the alerts, not quite so much.
Right, and we were able to, spin up a new instance, no problem, with one click. It took a bit of time, no big deal. So this led to a useful conversation about whether we'd actually want to be paged about scoring serve boxes going down, and if so, how many of them have to die before we'd want that? Is it really worth being woken up over? Is it basically fine until someone wakes up in the morning and checks their email?
Now, given that we just saw that one can die and the application will go on just fine, I don't think I really want to get a page about that at 4 a.m. because I'm not going to fix it at 4 a.m. if it's not breaking anything and I'm liable to mess things up further by trying to computer at that point. So I'd rather it just happen the next day. Meanwhile, I wouldn't, I don't want to, I'd rather I fix it the next day, but I don't want to get the alert anyway if I'm not going to take action on it at 4 a.m. because I don't want to grow into this alert fatigue. I think the important lesson here, though, is that we wouldn't have known about this, this metric that would page, that we didn't want to page unless we introduced the failure and watched the whole system, including our alerting pipeline, take effect.
Right, so after this, we found some issues for tweaking our alerts, and let's move on to the next test for now. What's next?
Okay, so for the second test, I think we can do a simple network partition between one of the API boxes and all of the scoring serves. This would simulate some, like random AWS network gremlins, and we'll exercise our upstream API services. We have some timeouts in place, so nothing should go catastrophically wrong. This is also something that we can simulate relatively easily with IP tables and some scripting.
Okay, so our hypotheses here are that charges should continue to go through successfully. They just won't be scored for fraud, and we might get some fraudulent charges going through that otherwise wouldn't. Hopefully not that many. We'll put everything back the way we found it real fast. Latency should be fine, and we should get paged for this one.
All right, so again, I'm going to be looking at a similar set of metrics. I'm going to be watching my phone to see if I get paged, and I'm going to be watching main API latency and our scoring serve latency. All right, Franklin? Franklin has gone ahead and done his IP tables magic, and it looks like the surprise has been spoiled for you. When we did this, I got no pages, but we noticed our main API latency shoot through the roof. Now, what is up with that? Well, the good news is, since we only actually simulated this with IP tables, we can go ahead and undo that. So I'm going to go fix that because I'm the fixer. And there we are. All right, great. So what do we do now?
All right, so no one got paged about this, which is a big problem. I mean, if fraud isn't getting scored and no one can reach our scoring service, we really want to fix that immediately. So, okay, we need to improve our monitoring score really quickly about that one. We're also going to want to set up, smart timeouts when scoring serve can't be reached, because it's going to happen again, and we do want charges to go through without people having to wait. So, okay, again, we have more issues to file to deal with later, and Franklin can describe the next test for us.
Okay, so we run Redis Sentinel with a primary and a couple of secondaries. So I think that for our last test, we should just kill 9 our primary and see what happens. I mean, it should just fail over, right? Redis is bulletproof. I'm clearly not worried about this at all.
All right, so you may not be worried, but I am worried basically all the time. Right, we're gonna save it up first, and we're gonna stick on S3, so we actually have our data somewhere else, just in case something goes horribly, horribly wrong. This is called foreshadowing. Our hypotheses were that, our primary node, when it goes down, one of the secondaries should be promoted to primary. The old primary comes back up, should come back up to the secondary. Scoring should continue normally, a little blip, but, basically fine. And if all this goes the way we expect, no one should get paged because, fine, something goes down, it comes back up, it repairs itself, there's nothing to do, sleep is great.
So while we do this, I'm just going to go ahead and watch the stats on the two secondaries, and I expect to watch one of them flip over to become the primary, and I'll, eventually the primary will come back and it'll rejoin as a secondary, and everything will be happy. All right, Franklin, go for it. All right, so now I'm watching my charts, expecting to see what I just told you. And not so much what we saw. So while we were watching this, instead of watching one of those secondaries flip over and become a primary, I watched both the secondaries lose all their data promptly, and the primary came back also with no data whatsoever. The secondaries furthermore overwrote their snapshots with empty data files. So no data.
So that kind of sucked. So the good news is that we have scoring circuit and a feature flag, so we can flag it up and allow charges to keep going through while all this was happening. And good thing we saved that backup, so we actually had snapshots to recover from, given that none of our nodes actually had their own snapshots anymore, and we killed everything. Right, I will handle the feature flag. Type.
And so during the process, I will go ahead and track down that backup and try to put it back where Redis expects it and try to repair this data set.
And I'll send out an update to the company to tell them that this didn't go as planned.
Right, okay, so what happened? Our team, someone blamelessly turned off snapshotting on our primary node maybe a day or so earlier. The theory was that, everything data is being sent to the second nodes anyway, they're all snapshotting, and I have a slide for this, hey, cool. Right, so yeah, data is being sent off to the secondary nodes, and they're saving their snapshots, and request latency is kind of high. Maybe if our primary node didn't have to waste time saving its own snapshots, latency would go down. We had snapshots saved on all those other machines anyway, and obviously this is totally cool, because if the primary node goes down, well, the secondaries will take over, and they'll recover from its snapshot, and everything will be entirely fine, which it wasn't. And what happened is that, there was no failover. Our primary node went down, boom, came back up as primary, rose from the ashes, and it had no snapshot to restore from, so it was empty. And then its emptiness was propagated to the secondaries, totally reasonably, and then they took snapshots of that complete lack of data, overriding those perfectly reasonable snapshots that had all of our data in them. I kind of understand that.
Right, so there you have it. That's running game day exercises, the good, the bad, and the ugly right there. What you should be able to observe there is that in the course of all these things, sometimes our application behaved the way we wanted, but our metrics or monitoring did not. Sometimes things diverged from our expectations a little bit, but we were able to deal with it and undo the pain easily. Sometimes it diverged a lot, and we were able to revert things with a lot of difficulty. Either way, we come up with a lot of stuff to fix because all of these are things that could happen at 3 in the morning, and we want to be ready when they do.
So with game days, you might think that you're testing one system in isolation, but that's not always the case. Often, you have no idea how failures in one system might cascade into a whole host of other things.
Because of this unpredictability, it's pretty important to broadcast around the company that the exercise is happening. You'll certainly want to tell people what you expect will happen, and also give them a point of contact if things escalate beyond that, which they're not unlikely to. So it's a good idea, for example, to have a dedicated Slack channel for this sort of thing. It's easy to let the engineering org know, certainly anybody on another team that's on call at the moment. And it's also probably helpful to let your support team or account managers, anybody customers facing, know about that. Ideally, your customers wouldn't see any of this, but you can't rule it out.
Of course, when you run the exercise, you might end up in such a broken state that you don't know what to fix.
Right, unless you've actually laid out your expectations and you recorded which one met and which one failed, so you have it all in writing, so you don't actually have to have a memory of your own, which I find very helpful.
But you could be still left with a mess of broken databases and broken promises.
So this is why it's important to prioritize remediation items to know what's important to fix. And set yourself a deadline to close them. In our case, we came up with about 25 places where our expectation diverged from reality, really. We narrowed that down to 6 remediation items that we wanted to tackle and set ourselves a deadline of 31 days to deal with it.
Okay, so this is a ton of fun, and we should do this again. But we can't actually tell anyone that we did this, right? I mean, we process money, like people would not be okay with that.
Well, not exactly. It turns out writing publicly about the lessons learned from this has had some pretty interesting effects. I mean, for one thing, this is an exercise in reliability, and we're able to advertise the steps that we're taking towards achieving greater long-term resilience for our services. You can also have wider discussions about the systems involved and kind of what led to the failure scenarios that you saw. So in our case, there was certainly a lot of discussion around the behavior that we saw with Redis. We were able to kind of confirm that behavior with some other people who had seen similar things. We got to educate some other people so they didn't have to live it for themselves, which is great. I think even more interestingly, we got some of the Redis developers themselves into the mix. They started working on some fixes for some of the rather unpredictable behavior that we saw, as well as commenting on some of the latency behavior that led us to enable those dangerous configs to begin with.
Right. So, we let a little more fraud through for a little while, and that's something we had to pay for, obviously. But, we found out the problems and we fixed them, and that was great. And publicizing your practice and your values lets other engineers know what's going on, what the company is all about. Because of this mess, we get to hire more awesome people who are great at breaking stuff. This is probably the right moment to say that, like everyone else here, we are also hiring. So if you'd like to come over and break shit with us, that'd be really cool. Let us know.
Yeah, and we get to travel to cool places like Portland and talk to more people about it.
No, so this is the end of the day, so you will be grateful to hear that we are done, and this is a short talk.
I think we've got time for questions, unless we're about to be swept off the stage.
How do you pick how you're going to take down the service? You could have done a network partition around the master instead of killing it. Why did you decide to do one versus the other?
So the question was, how do we pick how to take down a service? I don't think there's a hard and fast rubric for it. I think it's some combination of something that's either simple or likely to happen, or both. Like in that particular case, so you might be thinking, well, maybe we could have partitioned the master so that we could have recovered from it without losing all its data. Part of the kind of intent there was, well, it is certainly possible that something could come along and restart the service, but also probably mostly convenient to type kill line.
Yes?
How do you get company buy-in for something that has the potential to go terribly wrong?
Okay, the question was, how do you get company buy-in for something that has the potential to go terribly wrong? Well, you explained that if it goes terribly wrong now, it means it was going to go terribly wrong anyway. I mean, that's really comes down to it. We're not creating problems that were just there lying in wait for us, and this is pretty reasonable. People seem to understand that.
Yeah, I think in general, we try to avoid things where taking down all of the databases clearly is not going to help anybody. And so you just kind of have to weigh those.
Does working in the financial sector introduce any more challenges in terms of regulatory or other for running game days?
I don't want to feel this.
Next question. The real answer is that the question was about whether working in the financial space introduces other complications towards running these things, run regulatory environments. We have, let's see, what's the delicate way to answer this? We have taken great pains to architect ourselves in such a way that much in the same way you might isolate parts of your application. Well, I should probably stop here.
Stuff is reasonably separate. We're underwriting stuff, so ultimately if there's cost because of this, we're the ones paying it out. Beyond that, I don't feel like I don't know what I'm supposed to be saying sitting up here, so I'm not going to say anything else.
When you run a game day and you do this communication out to the company, do you use the term game day, and do you get backlash from people who interpret it as a game, and then when it negatively impacts their work, they think you're wasting their time or something?
So the question was, do we use the term game day when we are telling the company that we're doing this, and we get backlash from people who think that trivializes it, when it goes wrong, it wastes their time, wastes, air quotes. Yes, we use the term game day, but we've also, we have a bunch of internal documentation about what that means in the context of it and how this works. And when we tell people, hey, we're going to run one of these, we link them to the whole, here's an explanation of what a game day is and why we're bothering to do this. And I've never heard anyone have problems with the term. I mean, I guess if your company does, you totally make it your own term. Make them happy.
Also, if anybody watches us while this is going on, we're decidedly not having fun.
Yeah, so you mentioned you were answering some questions about why not do this in QA. Do you, that doesn't sound like a dichotomy to me, so some of these things seem like things you might want to try in advance, especially the recovery scenarios, like can we recover from backups? So do you also do some of these things in QA staging or test environments before you do the production?
Yeah, absolutely. You'll definitely, certainly. Yes, and the question was whether doing this in a production-like environment or in QA was really a dichotomy. I think it's absolutely correct that they don't need to be. Certainly to the degree it's possible, it's nice to test these sort of things in a QA or staging environment. It's really kind of bringing them up to the full production level where you're able to flush through with everything, including metrics and alerting. But ideally, you've given yourself an idea of what to expect beforehand.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, this is what you do once you're really convinced that everything is as stable as it's going to get otherwise.
One more? Okay. Who's the most excited person who has another question? You're so excited, you raise your hand really fast.
Right. Is your fixer blind to the scenario in play, or is it a planned exercise? I've done it before where it's kind of D&D style, and I've got a list of like a dozen things, and depending on how things go, they're going to be reordered, and a little more simulated. You guys do it that way, or does the fiction of the hypothesis go in?
Do you want to do this or
Yeah, sure. So the question was, is the fixer's role, like, do they know what the order of the test is or even what those tests are? Generally, when we've run them, it's not blind. Everyone's sitting in the same room. We talk through and sort of brainstorm which tests we actually want to run and then go through those exercises. Like, you definitely can do that sort of thing. I think it can be more interesting for sort of fleshing out, like, what is our instant response sort of pattern and all the things in that area. But
Cool.